Ruby Lane hesitated for a moment at the entrance of the restaurant, her fingers gripping the strap of her worn leather purse. The grand door loomed before her, a polished work of mahogany that gleamed under the warm lights. Inside, crystal chandeliers scattered soft light over marble floors so pristine they reflected every footstep. The scent of rare orchids mingled with fine perfumes, creating an atmosphere of extravagance she wasn't sure she belonged in. Her clothes were simple, faded jeans, a threadbare sweater, and well-worn flats that had seen better days. No hint of makeup softened her natural features, and her hair was pulled back without ceremony. She tried not to look out of place, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. As she stepped inside, whispering voices nudged at the edges of her awareness. A man at a nearby table tilted his head toward her, eyes narrowing in thinly veiled amusement. Two women exchanged a quick, sharp look before one whispered, "Who let her in? She must work here or be some charity case." Laughter followed, low and cruel. Ruby kept her gaze steady, though her heart sped up. She was used to such stares, but the refined coolness of this place made the scrutiny sharper, the judgment more biting. The maître d' stood near the front, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit. His posture was rigid, every inch the polished professional, but when his eyes landed on Ruby, a flicker of suspicion crossed his face. He studied her shoes, the worn edges of her purse, and the hesitant way she carried herself. Without a word, he already had decided she did not belong here. The maître d' approached Ruby with a crisp, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good evening, ma'am. Can I help you?" His voice was polite but carried an unmistakable edge, the kind that suggested he already doubted her presence. Ruby returned his gaze evenly, her voice calm though her heart fluttered beneath her chest. "Yes, I have a reservation under Ruby Lane." He raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "I see. May I ask if you are certain? Our records don't seem to show a reservation in that name for tonight's dinner service." Ruby swallowed the tightening knot in her throat but nodded. "I booked it 2 weeks ago. It should be in the system." The maître d' pursed his lips, then glanced toward a podium where a silver-clad assistant confirmed the reservations. After a brief pause, he turned back, voice carrying just enough volume for nearby tables to hear, "I'm afraid there must be some mistake. We do not have a guest by the name Ruby Lane listed for dinner." His words rippled through the room. At the nearest table, a middle-aged woman with perfectly coiffed hair smirked loudly, "Maybe she's one of the kitchen staff." "Looks more like it." Another man chuckled and muttered, "Lost, probably. Should ask for directions." Ruby's cheeks warmed, but she held her ground. "I assure you, I have a reservation. Perhaps it's under a different spelling?" The maître d' shook his head slowly, projecting an air of finality. "I'm afraid I can only seat guests with confirmed reservations." He gestured toward a cramped corner near the restrooms. "However, we may accommodate you there." Ruby's eyes flicked to the tight space. The restroom's buzz and flickering fluorescent lights made it the least desirable spot in the room, far from the elegant main dining floor. The space felt claustrophobic, a stark contrast to the openness elsewhere. "Thank you," she said softly, masking the sting behind her words. The maître d' led her there, his footsteps conspicuously loud in the quiet room. Some guests turned their heads fully to watch the spectacle, the unabashed deflation of a woman thrust aside by an establishment's gatekeeper. A few discreetly pulled out their phones, fingers poised to record anything out of the ordinary. Once seated, Ruby laid her purse on the table and tried to collect herself. Moments later, a waiter arrived with a tray bearing a gleaming carafe of sparkling water and 2 glasses, which he placed gently but without the usual flourish reserved for esteemed guests. Ruby ordered a glass of red wine. The waiter returned after a long wait, empty-handed. I'm sorry, ma'am, but the wine list is currently unavailable for your table. He offered a forced smile before retreating, leaving Ruby with only the cool water. From the adjacent tables, voices rose in muffled amusement. Did you see that? No wine for the charity case tonight. She'll need a mop more than a sommelier. Another voice added, I bet her clothes were thrifted. Ruby kept her head down, heart pounding painfully in her ears as more laughter circled her like cold smoke. Every so often, she would look up discreetly, meeting eyes that averted quickly or stifled giggles. The restaurant, for all its beauty, felt suffocating in that moment. Suddenly, a woman seated near the bar raised her glass slightly and murmured loudly enough for Ruby to hear, Enjoy your napkin, dear. You'll probably need it. Out of the corner of her eye, Ruby saw the maître d' laughing quietly with the host, their expressions smug. She blinked back the heavy sting threatening to rise. But she wouldn't cry, not here. Not now. Minutes dragged. Ruby focused on steadying her breath, recalling the reasons she came tonight. This place was important. More than just a restaurant, it was a symbol she had fought to preserve. And yet, here she was, dismissed, downgraded, treated like an afterthought. Another waiter passed by, this one straightening a candle on a table nearby. He glanced at Ruby with bland indifference, ignoring the water glass nearly empty at her table. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted it. She caught the maître d's eye and silently asked for refills or attention. He shook his head subtly, then turned away. Nobody gathered around to defend her. No one offered a kind glance or sympathetic word. The crowd was a wall of cold indifference, pierced only by occasional sneers and whispered jabs. Ruby's throat tightened. She breathed in deeply, the luxurious but suffocating air heavy with unspoken judgment. Inside, a whirlwind of emotions raged, embarrassment, anger, disbelief. But her lips remained pressed in a thin line, her posture erect yet fragile. No one helped her. No one stopped the snide remarks. The sensation of invisibility and rejection was complete. Eventually, a host approached Ruby again, his smile professionally tight. Ms. Lane, I'm afraid we must ask you to leave this seating area. The restrooms will need access. Ruby nodded, resigned, and began to rise. The room hushed for a heartbeat as many guests looked up, some with curiosity, others with disdain. Her eyes swept the crowd, waiting, watching, judging. Then she stepped lightly past the tables and slipped toward the exit, cheeks burning but dignity intact. Backstage, in the quiet space behind the velvet curtains, the maître d' wiped his brow with a crisp white handkerchief before chuckling softly to a fellow staff member. You saw how well I handled that. People like her don't belong in our world. We have to keep this place exclusive, pristine. One misstep, and the whole image crumbles. His companion nodded in agreement, scrolling through messages on a sleek tablet. Guests expect an experience, no imposters or those who don't fit here. The maître d' smirked, pride lighting up his eyes. Exactly. This place is a sanctuary for the elite. We protect the brand and the ambience. The room outside the staff area buzzed with renewed vigor. Laughter mingled with clinking glasses, waiters gracefully weaved through tables. The earlier tension was smoothed over like a wrinkle in a designer gown. Meanwhile, Ruby sat alone in a small, tucked-away corner of a nearby cafe, her mind still swirling. She forced herself to sip the lukewarm coffee, steadying the tremor in her hands. Around her, patrons chatted and laughed, but she felt separate, wrapped in a fragile bubble of isolation. She wiped a loose strand of hair from her face, tightening her hold on composure. Her breath came steady but slow, her disguise of calm honed through long experience. Suddenly, from across the street, the clear notes of a violin floated through the evening air, a familiar melody, rich and haunting, pulling at something deep within her. The violinist was performing as part of a small event outside the restaurant, the music soft and elegant. Inside the restaurant, at last, the violinist paused mid-song. The bow lifted, and she turned away from the grand piano to look toward the cafe where Ruby sat. The streetlight spotlighted the figure in plain clothes whose presence now dominated the scene. At that very moment, a sharply dressed young woman from the events organization hurried through the restaurant doors, glancing anxiously around. She found Ruby and approached with purposeful steps. "Ms. Lane? The owner has been looking for you," the woman said quietly but urgently. Ruby's eyes met the assistant's, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "The owner?" she echoed softly. Simultaneously, a tall man in a sharply tailored suit and a quietly efficient assistant entered the restaurant lobby, scanning the room. Their eyes locked on Ruby almost instantly. The atmosphere shifted as if the air itself grew heavier. Conversations dwindled into whispers. Glasses were set down more cautiously. The room held its breath. People who had been laughing moments before exchanged glances, the realization dawning that something significant was unfolding. The maître d' stepped back from his poised position, brows furrowed in confusion and unease. His confident facade flickered, replaced by quickened breaths and a jittery glance. Ruby, caught in the center of the gathering crowd's shifting focus, hesitated. Yet she stood up, the weight of uncertain eyes upon her shoulders, yet her movement purposeful and steady. The air tingled with tension and anticipation, and the entire space seemed to hold itself still, waiting for the next moment to unfold. The hush that fell over the restaurant was sudden and near total. The violinist stepped away from her instrument, a slender figure in a flowing black dress, eyes bright with quiet determination. She raised her right hand, delicately poised, commanding the room's full attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rang clear, elegant yet firm, "please allow me to introduce Ruby Lane. Our keynote speaker tonight, a visionary investor who has not only preserved this historic restaurant but breathed new life into its very soul." Ruby stood straighter, a subtle flush warming her cheeks as astonished eyes swirled around her. The crystal chandeliers caught the sparkle of the cameras now clicking and flashing, as guests pulled their phones from shallow pockets and purses to capture this unexpected moment. The maître d' stood frozen, his sharp gaze dulled by disbelief. His mouth opened and closed before a single word could come forth. For a moment, words failed him entirely. The certainty that had fueled his cold dismissal cracked visibly, and he glanced anxiously at nearby staff, some of whom had begun to whisper about the evening's abrupt turn. At the table closest to Ruby, the middle-aged woman who had jeered openly now clutched her pearl necklace, eyes flicking downward in embarrassed silence. Several guests who had so casually mocked Ruby lowered their phones and avoided her gaze altogether, faces flushed with regret. Ruby's lips curled into a small, controlled smile, serene and gracious. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, carrying clear through the room. "I dress simply not due to circumstance, but out of principle. I choose minimalist, practical clothing because I believe true style extends from integrity and focus, not frivolous displays." The guests absorbed her words, the air shifting as a profound quiet settled over the space. Ruby continued, her tone unflinching yet warm. "This restaurant faced closure not long ago. Through dedicated commitment and belief in its heritage, I partnered to revitalize it, honoring the tradition while welcoming warmth and inclusivity. Elegance, in my philosophy, isn't about appearances, it's about respect, kindness, and treating every person with dignity." Her gaze swept the room with steady, calm power, a subtle challenge to the snobbery that had so recently reigned here. The contrast between her quiet dignity and the earlier harshness was palpable. Murmurs began, tentative, then growing into genuine applause. Some guests wiped away tears, others exchanged looks of newfound respect. Ruby's quiet strength and clear values resonated deeply, softening the stiff, judgmental atmosphere. The maître d' swallowed hard, shame spreading across his face. He took a cautious step back as the restaurant's owner finally emerged from a shadowed doorway at the far end. Imposing, confident, and impeccably dressed, the owner approached Ruby with a respectful nod. "Ms. Lane," he said solemnly, "your vision and generosity have saved this place. We owe you our deepest gratitude." Ruby inclined her head courteously. "Thank you. I hope we can work together to make this a place that welcomes all with true warmth." The owner's eyes gleamed with understanding and resolve. "Absolutely." The guests, their previous snickers forgotten, now buzzed with admiration. The restaurant had transformed visibly in that moment, not by the crystal or decor, but by the revelation of Ruby's grace and the dismantling of old biases. Phones continued to flash as Ruby took her seat at a table in the center of the room, no longer near the restrooms but in the heart of the elegant dining area. Conversations blossomed into praise. The villainous coldness that had pervaded vanished beneath genuine smiles and expressions of contrition. Ruby's quiet success was neither brash nor loud, but it spoke powerfully. Her story, her values, her persistence illuminated the room far brighter than any crystal chandelier ever could, leaving behind a changed atmosphere thick with hope and respect. The owner's voice boomed with authority, cutting sharply through the gentle hum of the now attentive crowd. "Regarding the conduct witnessed earlier this evening, I want to make it unequivocally clear that such behavior will not be tolerated here. Effective immediately, the maître d' is suspended pending a full review." His tone left no room for argument. The room fell into a tense silence, all eyes turning to the maître d', who stood pale and unmoving at the side. The maître d's usual confident facade crumbled as whispers rippled through the restaurant. Guests who only moments before had been chuckling at Ruby's expense now stared, their expressions a mix of judgment and disappointment. Several hesitant voices joined the murmurs, quietly condemning the unwelcoming behavior that had marred the evening. One elderly gentleman shook his head. "I never imagined such arrogance hidden behind silver trays." A young woman at the bar muttered, "We expect respect here, or at least, we should." The maître d' shifted uneasily under the weight of collective scrutiny, shrinking further as his colleagues quietly turned away or avoided his gaze. The once revered gatekeeper of exclusivity was now marginalized, the crowd's mood turning decisively against him. Shortly after the announcement, news of the incident and Ruby's dramatic reveal spread quickly across social media platforms. The story of the modest woman, humiliated and then vindicated, captivated the public, sparking widespread discussion about inclusivity and class biases in upscale establishments. Hashtags praising Ruby's courage and condemning the maître d's conduct trended rapidly, further isolating him and prompting public backlash. Within the staff, quiet conversations turned toward accountability and training. Management swiftly organized workshops emphasizing diversity, empathy, and professionalism. The maître d', once a symbol of rigid elitism, was now the subject of intense reevaluation and remedial action. Days later, as the restaurant began its new chapter, the maître d' encountered Ruby again. She was returning to the building for a scheduled meeting, dressed simply but with an air of poised confidence. Their eyes met briefly at the entrance, the tension unmistakable. The maître d' hesitated, then bowed his head slightly, an unspoken apology etched in his posture. Ruby regarded him calmly, her expression unreadable but non-hostile. Without a word, she offered a small, enigmatic smile, neither fully forgiving nor condemning, and stepped inside, leaving him wrapped in silent reflection. From that moment, Ruby's presence within the restaurant was unmistakable. She moved with quiet authority, not flaunting her status but embodying it through actions grounded in respect and humility. The staff, inspired by her example, began to embrace a more open, welcoming approach, transforming the atmosphere from one of exclusion to inclusion. The maître d', relegated to a lesser role, confronted his own shortcomings, slowly reshaping his attitudes over time through mandated training and the subtle influence of the changing culture around him. Outside, Ruby walked down the city street one evening after a successful event at the restaurant. The golden glow of street lamps cast long shadows, but she strode forward with a steady pace and unyielding strength. Behind her, the elegant venue gleamed, a symbol not merely of luxury but of newfound grace and equality. Passers-by glanced her way, some with admiration, others with disbelief. Yet Ruby paid them no mind. Her thoughts were calm, focused on the path she had forged, one marked not by privilege but by resilience and dignity. As she disappeared into the night, the restaurant's door closed gently behind her. Inside, a transformed space awaited, forever altered by the simple yet profound presence of a woman who had refused to be invisible. The air was lighter, the voices warmer, and the sense of belonging genuine. The story of Ruby Lane became one of lasting change, not only for one night or one meal but for the very heart of a place that once excluded, now embracing all who came through its doors.